Thank you. My name is Peter Stanton. I'm the publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our annual Economic Forecast Breakfast, a partnership with the WBJ and the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. We have a full program this morning with terrific speakers, and to assure they all have the time they need, I'm limiting my opening remarks to the size of a tweet. There it is. This event is made possible by the support of our sponsors and by the hard work of the events team at the Worcester Business Journal and at the Chamber. So, along with our esteemed presenters, they all help us deliver a quality program. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to our speakers and to the teams that make this event happen. Our partners in this event, like I said, are the Worcester Regional Chamber. I think these are appearing, there they are on the slides. Our presenting sponsors for this morning's event are Bank of America and Clark University School of Professional Studies. Our corporate sponsor is the Worcester Regional Airport, and supporting sponsors are Bolus Lynch and Spectrum Business, and our media partner, Charter TV3. So thank them all, and I would like to invite up from the Chamber of Commerce, Tim Murray, the President and CEO, for a few comments. Tim.
Thank you, Peter, and I'll be brief because I think this is one of the events that we really enjoy being a part of and collaborating with the Worcester Business Journal. Probably one of the longer programs, but incredibly substantive, and this year is no different with our panelists and speakers who can give I think some unique perspectives, and I'm proud to point out all chamber member organizations and businesses, but we're really looking forward to the conversation. Certainly, as we drive around Central Mass and just look at the landscape, growth is underway. That's a positive thing, but where that growth is going to take it, how long it's going to last, how does it apply to different sectors are all part of the conversation this morning. So again, thanks to our panelists who've come from far and wide to give us their perspective, and I also want to thank the staffs, particularly the Worcester Business Journal and the Chamber team as well for their work in putting this event together, and the staff here at the Beechwood who work hard every year to make sure this event's a success. Thanks. Good morning.
Tim, you and I both usually give much longer speeches than that. Wow, this is moving. That's great. So, and next I would like to invite up Michael Garand, who's the Senior Vice President, Private Client, one of these long titles, Private Client Advisor of U.S. Trust and Bank of America Private Wealth Management. Michael?
I have the long speech. I want to thank Peter and Tim for that kind introduction. Let me start off by saying how proud Bank of America is of our long-standing relationship with these two phenomenal institutions that have made today and so many other forums like it possible, the Worcester Business Journal and the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Two organizations that are perfectly aligned with the driving purpose of our company, which is to make people's financial lives better. Like everyone in this room today, Bank of America is deeply invested in making sure Worcester's economy is thriving. That's because we know we're only as healthy as the communities where we do business and where our 5,000 or over 5,000 Massachusetts employees live. I'm joined this morning by several of my local colleagues from U.S. Trust, Merrill Lynch, Business Banking, Commercial Banking, and our financial centers here in the front tables. Familiar faces in the community who bring our world-class expertise to individuals, companies, and institutions every day in this market. My teammates and I are so pleased to have our colleague Karin Kimbrough back again this year, joining us today as one of the presenters. Welcome back to Worcester, Karin. It's great to have you. It's been an interesting year, and I'm sure it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'll close by saying how much we appreciate everyone joining us today. It's terrific to see so many of our clients, to whom I'd like to extend a special, sincere thanks for doing business with Bank of America and U.S. Trust and Merrill Lynch and the business banking folks. We appreciate and truly value the trust you put in us every day to make your financial lives better. Peter and Tim, thank you for the important work that you do to create a vibrant Worcester economy and events like this, wonderful events like this. Bank of America is honored to play a role in today's program, and we look forward to an interesting dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And our other presenting sponsor, of course, is Clark University School of Professional Studies. And I would like to invite up Mary Pisewicz, who is the program director at Clark, for a few welcoming comments from Clark University. Mary.
Thank you, Peter. We'd also like to thank the sponsor, the Worcester Business Journal, and the Chamber of Commerce. And I'm going to speak a little bit about the forecast of the intersection of education and business. In today's knowledge-based economy, technology and innovation are replacing low-skilled jobs with new and more rewarding positions. But these new positions require advanced degrees, and the trend is expected to accelerate at a rapid pace. According to a Georgetown Policy Institute report, by 2020, 65% of all the jobs in the United States will require post-education. Critical thinking, proficiency in analysis, cultural competencies, and leadership skills are now the baseline for the 21st century employee. However, the U.S. will fall short of qualified degreed employees by 5 million workers in 2020 if we continue at the current rate of higher degree attainment. But there is a solution. According to the World Bank, the economy in which we operate today requires an efficient integration of local businesses, universities, and municipal institutions to support innovation and adapt it to local needs, thereby creating new advanced local business ecosystems. The School of Professional Studies views itself as part of the efficient innovation system that exists here in Worcester. Leveraging the legacy of our founder, Jonas Clark, to promote and encourage learning as an offering to be adapted to the needs of the community and region, our programs are designed to help mid-level career professionals prepare and take advantage of the new workplace. We offer graduate programs to prepare career professionals for positions where tomorrow's leaders are in demand. Our degree programs are characterized by a diversity of worldviews and enlightening approaches to problem solving. Our grad students are challenged and involved through core degree course requirements, internship programs, high-impact learning initiatives, and their capstone project. It is through these unique educational approaches that the School of Professional Studies forms partnerships with our local business. Many local Worcester businesses and nonprofits are our clients for internships and capstones. Our world approach is also reflected in our faculty, who are professors of practice. These dedicated instructors work in their profession and teach because they want to share their knowledge and experience. Our faculty represent many of the thought leaders in the Worcester municipal, nonprofit, and corporate sectors. The School of Professional Studies is also focusing on assisting our local businesses to keep pace with changing the workplace. We now offer affordable on-site professional seminar workshops for local businesses, workshops aimed at mid-level career managers in the areas of communication, leadership, change management, and project management, to name a few. If you are interested in our seminar series workshops or would be interested in a corporate discount for employees, please provide your business card to a staff member out there at the table. Again, the School of Professional Studies is proud to be a sponsor of this year's economic forecast, and we hope you enjoyed this morning's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. So before we bring up the speakers, I just want to run through a quick summary of our Economist of the Year contest. And let's all look at each other. This is an economics event. This is serious. This is grim. Almost everyone should have a real business face on them because this is serious material. However, we also try and have a little fun here. On your table is an entry for this year's Economist of the Year contest, and it's a little slip of paper. And I think that several years ago, we had about 38 entries last year from this group, and I'd like to see that doubled. And I think I was guilty a couple years ago in driving down the number of participants, because what I did was we ran this whole spreadsheet of all the results
about 5 or 6 years ago. And I had this brilliant idea, and I posted it up on the wall as people left and said, you can all see how you all did. And I think there were financial advisors with their hands over their face going, oh my goodness, I finished 78th out of 80. This is terrible. So we don't actually run the bottom scores anymore. We just recognize the people at the top of the chart. So I'm going to go through a couple of those slides, and we won't have people come up now, but at the end, Chris Prosser out at the registration table will have a nice little gift certificate for the first place people in each of these categories. So let's go. Economist of the Year. The Dow Industrial Average, people made guesses last year. We had 37 people guessing. None of them got it right. They were all too low, okay? The Dow ended the year at 19,819. The high guess was 19,650. The low guess was 13,875. The winner is Tad Doherty, CPB, 19,650. Nice job, Tad. Dan Mastro-Totoro, Hanover Insurance Group, and Steve Yurden from Devereaux, second and third. Nice work. We can give him a little hand. All right. Federal unemployment rate. This was closer, people got this in the middle. The high guess was 6.5, the low was 4.4. Glenn Brunel, 4.7%, hit it right on the mark. Jeannie Conley, also Clinton Savings Bank, 4.7, tied for first place. Congratulations to the two of them. Yanglin Lin from WPI, Mike Topalian, BDC Capital, Matt Brothers from Bank of America, and Matthew Shealy, a name we'll hear again, from Merrill Lynch, all in the top three. Unemployment rate, again, everyone missed it. Massachusetts unemployment rate in December dropped to 2.8%. The low guess was 3.9%, and the high was 5.8. It was 5.0 as we headed into the year. Joe Sarkis from WPI, Yang and Lin from WPI, and Jasmine Ortiz, all closest, but not that close really, to 2.8%. Next, GDP, federal, not the rate for the fourth quarter, which is 1.9, but the rate for the year, which ended up growing at 1.6%. The guesses were between 3.5 and 1.25. Alex Manhassan from Prism Energy, number one. Peter Dunn, City of Worcester, close, and Glenn Brunel, third. And the price of Brent crude oil, since it was very much in the news, people had guessed a range of 78, high of 78, a low of $22. I think it was floating around in the 30s last year. It ended up ending December at $54.95. Chuck Ferris from Spectrum Health Systems was within a nickel. And Andrew Nago from Worcester Regional Chamber, $53, and John Peculius, $52. So we scored everyone on every category, and the top three overall winners for Economist of the Year, okay, and the winner only on those previous slides gets a gift certificate. All three on this Economist of the Year. Jeannie Conley, Clinton Savings Bank. Jeannie, I think you're here. Can you stand up for some recognition? Matt Shealy, baby, come on, right there. And Alex Manhassan from Prism Energy. Matt, we've been on the podium before. We've seen your name. So anyways, congratulations to all of them. I hope you all will enter. There's no hall of shame. Just do your best, and maybe we'll get you on the slides next year. The other thing I want to mention is, so there's Economist of the Year entry blanks, and then there are little cards for you to write down a question for our Q&A period, which is going to happen after each of the presenters present. So we're going to go through 4 presentations, and then there's going to be a Q&A period. Please fill out, as we're hearing the presentations, any question you might have, and we're going to go around and collect them. And so our moderator will have a set of cards to work from, as opposed to just kind of asking the audience with a microphone. We find that goes smoother. So please remember to write down those questions and gather them at your table, and we'll, near the end of the presentations, we'll be collecting those. So it is my pleasure now to introduce our moderator who will make this happen, and that is John Chetro-Szivos, who is the Associate Dean of Professional Studies and Online Education at Clark's School of Professional Studies. John has worked in higher ed for over 2 decades. Prior to that, he served as the CEO of a behavioral health care company and as an executive director of 2 healthcare centers. John has also served as a consultant to the World Health Organization in the Far East, Middle East, and Africa. Dr. Chetro-Szivos holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst in Communications, so it seems we have put him in the correct role as moderator and chief communicator for this morning's panel. John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Peter, and it's my pleasure to be here with this very esteemed panel that we have this morning for you. I think it's a really interesting time to be at an economic forecast. To say we're in a time of uncertainty would be a bit of an understatement. Unfortunately, I listened to MSNBC on the way down here, and there was a lot of talk about the chaos in Washington now and the chaos that could ensue in the rest of the country. A fascinating thing about us as Americans and as Western people, maybe it's the bane of our existence, but we don't like uncertainty at all. And the capacity to see what's in the future will link our businesses, our dealings in the world in a way that we can be successful if we only could see ahead. So for that, we have economists, not communication scholars, because I don't see much other than microphones and the way people talk. But we are at a very, very fascinating time. And I think we are really, really pleased to have these great speakers today. I think we will get some insight into what's going on in moving maybe from uncertainty to maybe a little bit of possibility. The common phrase I hear so much when people talk about what is going to happen is, we just don't know. And it's an uncomfortable position for us to be in. And we have some great minds to help us today. Maybe move to, this is what's possible, and then we could strategically align the things that we do. So given that, let me introduce our first speaker, who I'm sure you'll be very impressed with, Karin Kimbrough. And Karin is a managing director and head of investment strategy for the Chief Investment Office within Global Wealth and Investment Management, a division of the Bank of America and an arm of Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. Karin, with her very impressive resume, brings a wide range of experience in monetary policy, financial markets, and macroeconomics to the table. Prior to joining Bank of America and Merrill Lynch, Karin served as a director in the Federal Reserve Bank of the New York Markets Group, where she founded and led the financial stability function. While at the Fed, she also managed the foreign exchange trading staff, the quantitative analysis team, and a frequent author of reports on trends and asset valuation. Also financial innovation, leverage, and financial conditions. Her climb up the career ladder at such a young age also included previous stints at Morgan Stanley and the World Bank. So I'm really impressed with Karin's background and pedigree, a Ph.D. in economics from Oxford, a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School, and a BA in economics and French and English literature from Stanford. I hope you don't have student loans. Sorry, I'm in higher ed, that's what I always think of. A repeat presenter from last year's summit, and someone who just knocked everyone dead with this. Karin, we're really happy to have you, and why don't you come on up?
Good morning, and thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, Worcester Business Journal, for having me here today. I keep getting reminded about how much people enjoyed my comments last year, which is just stressing me out now. So one quick anecdote, I did go to Oxford, and when you go there and you do the master's coursework to get into the doctorate program for economics, you take your test just like anywhere else in a doctorate program. But at Oxford, they have a lot of old traditions, and one of them is to post the results of all your exams on a wall. So you take your exam, and then you find out, results are posted, and you go, and there's this one piece of paper attached to like a 13th century wall in Oxford, and everybody's crowding around. And they post who passed and who didn't. So it's insanely stressful. I did pass, and I know people who didn't pass and survived to tell the tale and are terrific economists now. So I think of that when you mentioned that you were posting results of forecasts. All right, let me start. So you mentioned uncertainty, That was going to be my key word. I'll try to be a little braver and tell you what we think is going to happen, but the truth is, we don't know, right? And we think that we've gotten into a position now since the election with a lot of shifts. Some of these shifts were happening well before the election. They were perhaps magnified by the election, but these are shifts from what you might want to call secular stagnation or cyclical stagnation to a fiscal reflation. So we went from a period where we had relatively, I would say, steady but low real growth, but also low nominal growth, low inflation, and so forth. And now moving, as everybody, and I think the consensus would agree, into a period of higher nominal growth, higher inflation. And this, of course, is coinciding with, I would call, a stepping back or a passing of the baton by central banks who are looking for the opportunity to try to have a little bit less prominence on the front page in terms of determining what's going to happen with our business cycle. I think they would be quite happy to see fiscal policy take over. And I think it's probably a little bit late for it to happen, but they are looking for it. And we're seeing here in the US, the Fed, very clearly starting to raise rates in a slow but steady fashion, but also looking for the ECB probably sometime next year to get out of the business of asset purchases as well. So that pressure on central banks to do very unorthodox policies is starting to recede. And of course, along with that is an inflation that's returning to something that feels more like normal levels. And I think we can come back to that in a moment. By the way, I am not a millennial, but I didn't wear my watch, so I'm trying to time myself so I don't go over, which is why I keep looking at my phone. Right, policy and politics, that I think doesn't even need to be explained. We are in a new administration that's tilting in a different direction. But also tilting in ways that people are not able to predict. And this, of course, as we've talked about, means businesses have trouble thinking about the strategic direction. And where you might have thought you had clarity at one point, perhaps pre-inauguration, you're not so sure anymore. I'd like to talk on that too, because I think that the uncertainty, of course, in the past probably sat more in the regulatory area. And that meant, particularly for banks, it was hard to envision anything other than just adhering to a very tight regulatory vice. That probably will loosen. And I think it was, the markets welcomed, unfortunately, perhaps, the resignation of Tarullo, who I had worked with and very much respect. But it was clear that it's a new administration now. And so we will see at the Fed probably a different person in that position operating as a vice chair of supervision, and that will change, drastically the outlook for how regulation is probably interpreted and enforced around, particularly in the financial sector. So we're seeing all these shifts moving, and the uncertainty used to be in regulatory sector, and I think now it's kind of almost in the industrial sector. It's kind of an almost existential Brexit-like question that probably companies in Britain are actually asking themselves as well, which is, how do I want to set myself up to succeed in a world where maybe trade relationships are entirely different, or maybe it's not an advantage to have a global supply chain, or maybe I can't hire the types of folks I was planning on hiring. So these are questions that I think are creating now the uncertainty. And finally, I think there's a lot of geopolitical risks, and that will create episodic volatility. And you'd be quite right in saying, hey, Karin, right now actually volatility is pretty low. It is. It's low in terms of implied volatility in the stock market. It's low in terms of the bond market's implied vol. But we think there are reasons for that actually can be explained, and we don't think that will last indefinitely. So a lot of shifts going on in the big picture, I guess, behind the scenes. But really, if I tell you what we think is going to happen, and I thought, why not just put it up here on a piece of paper so you can see it. Here's our forecasts for this year, our estimates of what we think this year will look like and what we think next year will look like in terms of GDP growth. And I apologize for anyone in the back of the room who can't see it, but I'll just tell you the story verbally. You don't need to see the chart. Essentially, everything's going to grow a little faster this year than it did last year. That's the bottom line. So things are improving, and it's not just improving in the US, it's improving globally. This improvement didn't start with the election. It started before the election. Emerging markets had been in a 5-year slump, and they've been coming out of that slowly. And so the second from the bottom line of this slide actually shows you that we think emerging markets will grow a little over 4.5% this year, and then we'll speed up to a little over 5% next year. This is that recovery, broad-based, happening not just in the BRICS, but in all emerging markets. That's a nice little tailwind that complements the lift that we're seeing here and that we expect here, where the US will grow faster. You'll note that at the bottom I have China. Our view on China is really that it's sort of, obviously it's navigating a lot of transitions that it's trying to make in terms of how the composition of its economy and how it's focused. But it's essentially growing in the range that they're predicting, which is 6.5% to 7%, and we think that's likely to happen. So everything a little better and inflation a little higher, and really this is perhaps a Goldilocks forecast. And when I talk to our analysts about, well, what do we think is really going to happen in terms of the S&P or the dollar yen, for example, or 10-year treasuries, I get these forecasts that are kind of like, well, we think it's going to go up, but it could go up this much or that much. And there's a range in there, and the range can be pretty wide. So for example, our sort of base case for the S&P for the end of this year is 2,300, 2,400. It's about where we are now. And we think you could see pullbacks along the way, but eventually we'll end up about where we are now. So it's a very sort of middle of the road forecast. What it's hiding is the potential for a great upside where you have faster growth, higher inflation, a Fed that's judicious in its rate hikes, transmits them well, doesn't scare anybody with any kind of taper tantrum comments. And at the same time, we don't have fears about, let's say, lowering the growth rate of our labor force through mass deportations, or getting in tit-for-tat trade disputes, or anything that would really, frankly, lower our actual growth and our potential growth going forward. So I can tell you a great story, and I can also tell you a story where none of that works out, and we end up with an S&P call of 1,600, which is well below where we are. And that is literally how a lot of our analysts are thinking of it. It's almost a bimodal kind of world that we're in, depending on the policy environment that we move into. I'm going to skip a bunch of slides, so hopefully you don't get dizzy as I skip through. I mentioned that the emerging markets were doing better. This is a slide of how global growth, I think, is increasingly synchronized. You have a light blue line at the top. Those are developed markets. That's the US, that's Europe, that's the UK, and so forth. They're doing better. But what I really want to point out is the dark blue line. Those are emerging markets. They're also doing better, finally, after quite a long slump. And some of this pickup that we're now seeing is due to China's fiscal stimulus that we had. It was quite aggressive last year, and we did see results for that. And of course, China and the US are kind of, I'm not even sure what the right analogy is, two wheels on the bike. You need both of them turning to go forward. And together they make up about 40% of global output. So you need them both doing well for the world to do well. And that's the bottom line. It's as simple as that. Anything else is important, but not as important in terms of growth. So China doing better, the US doing better, this is what gives us this synchronized output increase that we're expecting. And when we look at, say, maybe more micro indicators of global performance, what we see is more airline seats being sold, more excess capacity globally and factories getting worked down. We see more shipping and freight activity globally. So all of this is a sign of increased activity and improvement, which gives us the sense that, yeah, things are going to be better this year than last year. It should be brighter. The consumer confidence and optimism has also stayed buoyant enough to support that. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, flip through slides pretty quickly just to keep track of my time. But we do see, of course, inflation rising here, but also in Europe. Even in Japan, where really they're still flirting with a lot of deflation, things should improve in the sense of getting back to a kind of a good inflation over there. Here in the US, we don't think inflation's going to breach 2% this year by the measures that the Fed cares about. So what I mean by that is inflation will rise, but it won't rise too quickly. It will be the good kind of inflation that we like, where you have demand generating higher prices, you have tighter labor markets, and higher wage growth, generating more willingness to spend, businesses feeling a little bit more optimistic, willingness to spend on their end as well through CapEx and hiring. So we think the inflation environment is picking up here, but also abroad. And I will just note that a lot of us have also expectations for European inflation to pick up in the early part of this year, but not last. So you may see that coming down the pike, where you start to see German inflation over 2%. But that won't last. That should fade. It's just kind of related to energy. We also see things like the break-evens rate, the tips, the things that price in what you think inflation will be 5 or 10 years down the road. Those are all picking up. And by the way, whenever anybody asks me, I'm a former Fed person. I was not in the room at the FOMC, but I worked there a long time. And they ask me, what do you watch? A couple things I watch. One of them is this: when inflation expectations are dipping low and seem persistently going in the wrong direction, that's a bad sign. They now seem like they're moving back up. They're kind of reverting back to a longer-term mean. The mean is really actually more like 2.5%. Over a long horizon, but they're at around 2% now, so this is a good sign, and this should make the Fed feel very relaxed. And I think you hear that a little bit with Yellen, who's like, yep, we could do 2, maybe 3, we'll see. Anything could happen. She's relaxed now because she's getting where she wants to go. I mentioned wages are accelerating. We think that will continue, albeit slowly, and one thing to note is that the wage growth is really occurring most in the millennial sector. So the youngest people are seeing the fastest income growth, which is great because they've been delayed. So you want to see that. And I would just add that that's, I think, an important counterweight to a lot of the worry about, our economies are aging, and here in the US and in Europe and in China, we have all these aging economies. There are a lot of millennials and centennials, if you're familiar with this term, folks who were born between, say, 98 and 2016, they make up about 50% of the global population. So half of the global population is age 0 to 36. So first of all, many of you feel very old. Although here you're not necessarily too outnumbered, and I'm in that category, by the way, as well. I also feel a little outnumbered globally. And where are all these people who are age 0 to 36? Where is that growth going to come from? It's going to come from them. They're sitting in India, Nigeria, Brazil, here, and China. That's where they are. So when people ask me for a short-term view, I give them one story. When they ask me for the long-term view, I start talking about millennials, the scale opportunities of tapping into a great number of people who are going to come online, who are going to want a house, they're going to want technology, they're going to want banking and payment solutions, they're going to want education, they're going to want media and entertainment, they are going to want all of those things. So it's hard for me to be the dismal economist when I think about this trend of this massive group of young people who are not necessarily here. A lot of us are here, a lot of them are here, but they're also abroad, and that makes for a lot of opportunities. There are, of course, the counterweight is that there are a lot of boomers. They hold all the wealth right now, and that's probably a nearer-term focus for opportunities, but the long-term focus is abroad. Let me quickly move to 2 other things, and then I'll stop and I'll stick around for questions at the end of our panel, just being cognizant of time. So right now the labor market's really tight. We know this. Unemployment is, what did we say, 4.7, 4.8, something like that. And wage growth has been picking up. It's not quite at a steady pace, but it's definitely been accelerating over time. And then the question I often get is, okay, so when's the recession? When should we start worrying? And one of the things that I like to look at is the quits rate. It's kind of a favorite within the Fed. It's not a secret. I mean, Janet Yellen talks about it a lot when you hear her speak. And the quits rate is the take this job and shove it measure. It's the idea that you're going to leave the current job of your own volition because you found something better that you like, that pays more. And that's this green line that you're looking at. And I circled a couple of points on this green line when you had a turning point, an inflection, and suddenly people stopped quitting. When people quit, labor market's just fine. And when they stop quitting because they can tell inside their own company that maybe they need to just lie low and shut up, you know, you can't tell me you don't know what I'm talking about. That's when you think, oh, things are starting to soften a little bit. And so that's what we watch. That's a kind of a precursor to when is that labor market going to soften? When do I think maybe the unemployment rate is going to start to turn up? I don't see that yet. I don't think I'm going to see it this year. I think I might see it a year and a half from now. But I don't see it yet. I think we're going to have a nice, strong consumer. I think the labor market has another leg in it. If you just from the businesses that are looking to hire, and you hear from small businesses that feel really energized by the election, they feel energized by the opportunities that they expect to get from the tax changes. And let me quickly turn to that. Goodness, there's a lot of slides in here. All right, stick with me. Let me start with this. So I mentioned the tax changes. Obviously, I think you're all familiar with what they are. Our view is that some of it's good, some of it's bad, in the sense that some of it could be very supportive of growth and some of it could be very harmful. You know, we kind of list here the big issues, but we do think tax cuts are business friendly. I don't know anyone who wants to argue with me on that. They're particularly friendly for small businesses that have fewer avenues to kind of find, I'll call it loopholes or alternatives to just paying the flat out tax rate. It's important for me to mention small businesses because they're the ones that create the jobs that kind of continue our economy. They're the ones that start off as innovators often, but not always. And so we think that these tax relief or tax reform will be very beneficial, particularly for the small firms and for job creation and innovation. Deregulation is always considered business friendly, although it brings its own risks, of course. And then the big spending increases, that can be great if we don't end up with just a lot of inflation. So I think the jury's out a little bit on that, but it should be near-term growth friendly. The unfriendly things are below. I think they're obvious. It's the reversal of free trade. It's the fact that we all now are established in global supply chains and that there are whole industries that are levered to the idea of half my content comes from abroad. And I don't even mean Mexico. I mean Sri Lanka or Vietnam or China. So that would mean a massive reversal for a lot of retailers, consumers, for automakers to have to deal with something like the border adjustment tax. Those are the big losers, potentially. Deportations, any change to the size of the labor force slows our own growth, and we know this. So these would be near-term growth unfriendly. And I wanted to just show a chart. This is one that we show a lot, which is the initial excitement about Trump, I think, came with this idea that maybe it looked a lot like what Reagan did. And one of the charts that a couple of us do show is one that when Reagan came in, doing a big wave of deregulation, doing a wave of more spending, tax cuts, and frankly, he did old-fashioned spending. People were getting checks, sent to them to go spend. That was the old-fashioned fiscal spending. That happened when unemployment was over 10%. So now we'd be doing this when unemployment is 4 and change and getting tighter. And so the question there is, how much can you get for that without just generating inflation? And I think that's a question that economists can, navel gaze and grapple about. But it's a valid question. And then let me leave you with a happy thought, and that's not it right there. Hang on. Number one risk. Oh, rats. I didn't want you to have to sit through this. I'm going to click through this and pass this along. Are robots happy? Do they make you happy? My happy thought is partly that there's a whole bunch of young people in the world. They may not all be here, but a large swath of them are here in the US, but they're everywhere, and they're going to create demand for opportunities that are investable, that transform our world, that continue to keep us innovating. The other happy thought is we are in the age of robots. Artificial intelligence is here. I think that we're in a place where you're going to see these robots slotting into all aspects of your personal life, your professional life, how you interact when you shop, the drones that will deliver your pizza one day, the healthcare that you receive. I look forward to hearing about the technology insertion that's happening in all facets of our economy. But the slide here, which you probably can't read from so far away, really just shows that everything from the military to the consumer, are using robots, and that should continue. And one of the slides, and I'll end here, is that there are inexorable shifts in our economy. I think one of them is this green line, which is sad, and I think explains a lot of the election, which is the manufacturing jobs in America from 1972 to now. And they just basically fell off at a certain point. It was just over. And that goes with globalization. And when you ask someone how much does it cost to hire someone in Mexico to do an assembly line job, they'll tell you, well, all in, maybe it's $15 an hour, if that. And in America, it's about $36, $37 an hour. So what's the option? You can bring those jobs back here and hire people, or you can get robots to do it. And I think that that's probably where we're headed in many ways. Japan thinks it's a great option because they're running out of people. But we have a lot of people who would probably like to work, and so that may, for us, be something we need to transition. As investors, we think it's a great opportunity, technology, healthcare, biotech in particular, which I didn't really get to. But we also like the consumer avenue because we really do think that in the future there are many, many consumers looking to take advantage of the technology, the media, the mass entertainment that we see globally being shared. I'm going to stop here. I'll stick around for questions at the end of the panel. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Oh, do you want to sit up here on the stage? We'll be doing questions later. Okay, great. Okay, our next speaker, and thank you, Karin, that was enlightening for sure, is Michael Collins. Dr. Collins served as Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts Medical School and Senior Vice President for Health Services at the University of Massachusetts. I kind of teased him and said he had the greatest commute here out of all of us, just walked across the street, which is not always safe. Michael oversees the university's system-wide health and life sciences portfolio. As Chancellor of the Medical School, Dr. Collins oversees a burgeoning institution with more than 1,100 students in 3 graduate schools, the School of Medicine, the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences, and the Graduate School of Nursing. A myriad of diversified business units, including Commonwealth Medicine, Mass Biologics, and an internationally renowned biomedical research enterprise, employ an astounding 6,000 people across the street and in its other campuses. Dr. Collins is a graduate of the beautiful college on the hill in Worcester, Holy Cross, and Tufts University School of Medicine. He's a board-certified physician in internal medicine and a fellow of the American College of Physicians. Please welcome Chancellor Michael Collins.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here this morning. I think I was always told, Peter referred to us as economists. I was always told that an economist was an accountant with a personality. So I have never been referred to as an economist in my life. And I will say simply that I've been asked to talk a little bit about the economic engine that is healthcare. But this panel here is really, got to be honest with you, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And that is how I feel this morning, talking about the future of the economy. Now, one thing I do know, healthcare in this room will increase. Based on what you ate this morning, and I saw it, the sausages, the bacon, the eggs, all of that's perfect. And we have a terrific leader of our healthcare system, Eric Dixon. And we have a phone number, 855 UMASS MD. You can get in to be seen today. If you need a cardiac cath, we can take care of that. It's not a problem. I guarantee that many of your coronaries are squeezing up at the moment, and we'll be very happy to look after you. Now, if you walked out this door and looked down the hill 50 years ago, this is what you would have seen. And in 50 years, this is what we've become. and it's an incredible economic engine. I'm going to talk about some of the dynamics that occur there. Although this picture actually reminds me of one of my early days at the office. Shortly after I got to the school, I received this really beautiful bouquet of flowers. It was big, gladiolas, and it was in like a white thing. And the card said, with sympathy, Betty Lou and Fred. And I asked anybody around the office, do you know anybody, Betty Lou and Fred? Nobody knew them. So I called Mary Ellen, my wife, and I said, sweetie, do you know anybody named Betty Lou and Fred? Because I got these flowers and they're wishing me sympathy because I got this new job. And she said, no, I don't think so. Better call the florist. So I called the florist. And I said, hi, it's Dr. Collins from down the med school. I got this beautiful, display of flowers this morning. And it says, with sympathy, Betty Lou and Fred. So the person on the other phone said, hold on a minute, I'll get right back to you. So she came back to the line and said, Doctor, we're concerned. We think you got the wrong flowers. And I said, oh, it's no problem. They're beautiful flowers. And she said, no. She said, are you sure it's like a big thing of gladiolas and a thing looks like, I said, yes, exactly what it looks like. She goes, oh my God, I've got to go. I said, no, it's no problem. Maybe you could just tell me who the flowers are from so I could write them a note to say thank you. She said, no, I've got to go. I've got to get her back. I said, no, really, it's not that big a deal. Just tell me the flowers are fine. You don't have to replace them. She said, no, I've got to go. And I said, why? And she said, because your flowers have gone to the funeral home. And I said, well, it's no big deal. She goes, it's a big deal. And I said, why? He said, because the card says good luck in your new location. All right. Okay, we got to liven this crowd up a little bit this morning. Sorry. All right, let me talk a little bit about the impact of the economy in Massachusetts, about the university, our healthcare sector here in Worcester and across the Commonwealth. So a study was done by the Donahue Institute to look at the economic contribution of our institutions in Massachusetts. And here you can see on the slide, you probably can't see it, but if you look carefully, you'll notice that the university brings around $6.2 billion of economic activity into the Commonwealth, and the medical school is responsible for $1.5 billion of that. And if you look at the jobs in the Commonwealth, we're responsible for around 45,000 jobs, and the medical school will be around 11,000. So the state invests around $46 million into the medical school. That would be the lowest investment by a state in a public medical school in the country. And I'm not proud of that, but it's a fact. But that investment leveraged around $1.6 billion in economic activity, which is about 35 times the state's investment. So if you look at investing $1 into one of the universities in the system of UMASS, and you look at the investment of the state into the medical school, it's about a 35-to-1 payback. So we feel pretty good about that. It's been said that we are a large employer, so around 6,000 people come to work today at our institutions. We're not only in Worcester, but we're in Boston and in Fall River, in Charlestown, in 170 different communities in the Commonwealth through our Commonwealth Medicine entity. So around 6,000 people, around $900 million in revenues at the med school. We're one of the largest taxpayers. I think we're the 7th largest taxpayer in the city of Worcester because of the biotech park that's here. Around 4,000 of our people live in Worcester and around 5,000 in Worcester County. So we're pretty important. If you add the health system, then another 13,000 people. You can see how enormous we are to the economy of the local region. Now, I'll bet when you walked in here today, you didn't realize we have 2 other companies. One's called Commonwealth Medicine, one's called Mass Biologics. What are they? Well, Commonwealth Medicine is a consulting company. So we have about a 1,400-person consulting company that consults on the use of public dollars to take care of public patients for who public dollars are used, both in the Commonwealth and across the country. And these consultants help assure that when a a public dollar is used to care for a patient's used efficiently. So what does it mean by that? So if you have an insurance card and you need a drug and you go to the pharmacy, you're told there's a formulary. Well, Medicaid patients in Massachusetts didn't have a formulary. So we put a formulary into the Medicaid program, saved $1 billion for the state. There are transitional assistance checks, 220,000 every year for Massachusetts residents on transitional assistance, welfare. And on a regular basis, their eligibility for the program has to be evaluated. And so we do that in real time, issue 220,000 checks a month. The state was paying $88 million for that service. We do it for 20. And I could give you, chapter and verse. So it's a very important. Last year, we saved the Commonwealth over $5 billion, $3.5 billion that they would have spent had we not got a federal dollar to pay for health care in Massachusetts, and $1.5 billion in actual savings, like the $60 million we saved on the check. So it's very important. 1,400 people. Mass Biologics, around 300 people, 2 facilities in Mattapan, 1 in Fall River. And in those institutions, we are, in those buildings, in that entity, we're actually discovering monoclonal antibodies, drugs that will be used to care for patients. For instance, we're about to announce, I'll go to India in April for the announcement of a rabies drug that we have discovered in trials with a company called the Serum Institute of India, which we will now sell for under $10 a dose. But you can imagine now in the developing world of India and China, not a lot of rabies in Worcester, but in India and China, this is a very large problem. And for us to be able to discover a drug that we can sell for under $10 a dose in the developing world is extremely important. We've just licensed our drug for C. diff. It's not a pleasant conversation, but C. diff causes a diarrhea. It used to be in nursing home patients. It's now in the community. And our agent we licensed to Merck, has just been put on the market and will return a very handsome return to the medical school in the future. So if you look at a big, large consulting company, a big, large drug, we're the only nonprofit manufacturer of drugs in the country. The only medical school that would have either one of these 2 entities. So we're quite proud of that, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. And then if you look at the rest of the academic enterprise, we have a School of Medicine, a Graduate School of Nursing, Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences, and a very large residency education program, almost 600 residents. You can see that the enterprise is really quite large at the medical school. Now, there are a couple factors that I think we should think about as we look to the economic impact into the future, and one is in research. The blue line at the bottom is the state appropriation to the medical school. You can see that hasn't changed in a lot, since '85. It's been around $40 million. If you look at the growth of the research enterprise, you can see it's extraordinary, and we're now approaching $300 million. In fact, in the last year, we've broken into the top 30. We're 29 now in the nation. If you look at all of the medical schools that receive research funding, we're now 29th in the country, and that number is growing towards 300 million, and I believe we'll get there in the next few years. And that's a very important factor in our economy, because we know that a research dollar has a multiplier somewhere between 2.1 and 2.3. So if we're bringing roughly $300 million of research into the medical school, that roughly means around $600 million into the economy. A principal investigator will hire on average 7 people. Those jobs are roughly $60,000 a year jobs. They're very good jobs. And right here, right across the street, we have folks working this morning who wake up every day trying to find the cure for ALS or for diabetes, cardiac disease. And I think we can feel quite confident that the research enterprise here will continue to blossom unless, of course, there's a major impact in the economy which says we're not going to invest further in research. And when I said earlier that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, I meant it, because there has been very little, almost no commentary coming out of Washington about what's the future of the investment in research in the nation. Now, in my opinion, research brings hope to the human condition. And if you're a patient with a disease, and it doesn't have to be a bad one, it can be diabetes or early cardiac disease, or you can name it, or it can be a bad one like ALS or leukemia. And you feel that there is no research being done in that area. Trust me, when I talk to a patient about the fact that they've been given a new diagnosis like ALS, I had a guy call me about 3 months ago. This guy is bench pressing 300 pounds a day. And he has been told he has ALS, which means in a year, he won't be able to lift up this slide changer. And if there's no research being, so he says, hey, you're the finest ALS place in the world. Is there any chance I can talk to your doctors? And I said, absolutely, we can make that happen. I said, how are you doing? He goes, I'm not doing good. This is bad. He says, my whole world changed. I just had my 2 grandchildren. And I'm not going to be able to raise my arm in a year. If there's no opportunity for research into that disease, if there isn't a place like UMASS and scientists like Bob Brown and his colleagues, if our nation doesn't determine that the values construct of us as a country makes it essential that we invest in research into the future, then I'm not sure what any else of that economic forecast matters. And if you listen to the concept of a large tax cut and the elimination of defense discretionary spending, so we're going to now build 70 more Navy ships, and look at the security of our country is essential. But if we're going to make a major investment in defense, and we're going to give a $10 trillion tax cut, I worry about what the investment will be in research into the future. Today, the investment in our nation in research is at $2,002. This is 2017. This is a problem that all of us need to be concerned about. And we're lucky we have Jim McGovern, we're lucky we have 2 senators that are in favor of it. We're lucky to have a terrific Massachusetts delegation, but the research into the future is of great concern to all of us. Here's just some metrics. This is NIH dollars. I'll bet when you got out of the car this morning, you didn't realize that we're less than 40 million behind Harvard, and that we're way ahead of BU, almost 5 times as big as Tufts. And you should be very proud. You're a medical school. It's a state medical school. And we're very proud of the growth and research that's going on. This is NIH dollars. You double this number, and you look at all the other folks who are investing in research at our university. Now, so this year we'll have about 280 million. 220 million of that came from federal agencies. So you can see why I'm concerned if we're going to make a cut in federal spending, or if we're going to have an emphasis in other areas like building ships and bombs and those sorts of things. That could be a problem for us. If you look at the multiplier I talked about a little while ago, so it's 2.5. So just think about that, what that means to the local Worcester economy. If that number stops its growth, what that could mean to the Worcester economy. If you look at our rank in licensing income, so when our scientists discover a drug, we create a company. We're in the top 15 of all universities for licensing revenue. I'll bet you didn't know that when you woke up this morning. And if you look at the University of Massachusetts, we're 97% of the licensing revenue of the University of Massachusetts, so the whole university, just here in Worcester. And so, I'm quite proud of that. If you look at the number of patent applications we file in a year, so we have around 364 patents. We have about 550 worldwide. It's an extraordinary exponential growth of investment in companies. These are companies we've established with the science from our laboratories. We have companies in Massachusetts like BRM, in Worcester like BRM and RXI. If you look at companies just established in the last year, Voyager and Fulcrum. Voyager is an interesting story. Voyager, a group of folks came together, group of Cambridge investors. They hired a dozen people, and they took 18 months. They went across the world looking for where to invest, and they kept coming back to Worcester. They kept coming back. They kept coming back. And they invested roughly $60 million into the company, and in 6 months, $100 million followed that, 60, 200 million followed that, and then the company went public. And this will be a company that looks at single gene disorder diseases, and they follow that now with investment. You can buy that, by the way, it's Voyager. That's public now. Fulcrum has just been started, again, single gene disease. We have some very interesting thinking about a woman has two X genes, and we find the disease on one of those X genes. If we could silence it, believe the other X gene could continue to work, and maybe for Fragile X and Rett syndrome, where the disease is on one side of the X, we could silence that perhaps we could find a cure for that disease. And in the ALS world, Voyager is now very interested in the SOD1 gene, SOD1, superoxide dismutase 1. It's a gene found in the familial form of ALS, and we are about, within days, we are about to put that gene in a vector, think of an envelope. We're about to put that gene into a vector and to put that into a patient. The thinking being that in ALS, you have this progressive weakness, and if we could arrest the weakness in a patient where we know which gene is defective, so that the next time the cell replicates, it replicates with a correct gene. So just think of a zipper. We've got one of the tangles of the zipper is broken. We're going to fix that tangle, and the next time the zipper gets done, it gets done perfectly. Imagine, and we're going to put that in the patient now within days. Extraordinary. And it's a driver from here. It's not that far away. Okay, so I talked about our people, many work in Worcester. Let me just say one bit about the global talent, because I'm not in a good place about the challenges for immigrants. I'm just not in a good place about it. I have been writing about it. I've been talking about it. We have 1,300 colleagues on our campus from 80 different countries. And we have 136 international students in our Ph.D. programs who are conducting the science. And they're afraid. We have 15 colleagues from one of the 7 countries. And they're petrified. We have chairs of divisions who, if you had one of the needs for one of the most intricate surgical procedures, and I'm not going to say any more than that because I'm not outing the doc, who is a refugee from one of those countries, who stopped me in the hall last week and said, I don't know what to do, Michael. I'm supposed to go to Geneva to give one of the most important papers in my career. I'm afraid I might not get back into the country. And he has an American passport. On February 22nd, which according to my calendar is next week, 1,000 applicants from those 7 countries are going to be in what's called the match. And the match determines where your internship is the following year. 1,000 of the top applicants in the world from those 7 countries will apply for residencies in the United States. And I am very concerned that American programs will just say, it's easier not to rank them, because if we don't rank them, we don't have to worry about whether we can get them a visa and get them here ready to go into a residency on July 1. There are 10,000 internists with J1 visas, about a fourth of the internist population in the United States. We have 2 postdocs that are ready to come, and they are stuck because they can't get a visa. We have a global talent pool. Look at the numbers. We have the smartest minds in the world who are in our science facilities, and we may not be able to get them into the country. And I talked to someone the other day, I said, oh, it's too bad, they'll just have to wait a year. If you've spent your whole career advancing to be one of the top scientists in one of those 7 countries, and now you're just told, oh, it's too bad, you'll just have to wait a year. There has to be a better way. I want our nation to be safe. I'm concerned about international security. There ought to be a way that those 1,000 applicants can be reviewed and approved so that they could get visas. And that when you put a blanket approach in like this, it causes such extraordinary problems. You want to look at a risk to the reputation of science. You look at the Ph.D.s from our country. If you look at the investment, Karin just talked about this, you look at the investment of China and Singapore in science in our country. If you look at that reputation, if you look at the investment that they're making, I have to counter proposals from our scientists who get proposals from those countries who say, look what they'll give me. You want to look at a risk to American health care. We have these folks not come here, okay? I'm going to stop there. I look forward to taking questions after. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Michael, for that inspiring and yet somber issue. That one of the things we do know at Clark, we're in the same boat with you, and we feel your pain, is that 30% of our student population is international. In our applications, while you're here, it's down about 32% this year. Even from the non-7 nations, international students are just petrified to come into the country right now. So it could have an incredible impact, and it's not just Clark and UMASS. All of the 15 colleges in Worcester County have international students, and this is really a very frightening turn, but maybe we'll have something happier here. I'd like to introduce Timothy Mammen. He served as IPG Photonics Chief Financial Officer for 17 years and was promoted to Senior Vice President in 2013. Tim has been on an incredible ride at IPG, being one of the senior executives who've helped drive the firm's growth from $22 million in 2002 to $1 billion pace in 2017, quite a growth. Prior to joining IPG, Tim served as the finance director and general manager of United Partners, PIC, a commodities trading firm in the finance department of EI, DuPont, Moores and Company. He holds an upper second Bachelor of Science honors degree in International Trade and Development from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and is a chartered accountant and a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. Please welcome Timothy Mammen. While Timothy's coming up here, let me just remind you that there are cards on the table that look sort of like this. If you have questions, please fill these out, because the panelists will join me later when we have Tim and we have Dr. White, and we'll be taking your questions then. So Tim, I'm sorry, it's all yours.
No problem, John. First of all, thank you to the Worcester Business Journal and the sponsors for hosting this event and inviting me to present here. As you will have heard, I started out as an economist and became an accountant, so I'm clearly going the wrong way in that direction. And I'm going to have to ask Karin why on earth she ended up at Oxford and not the London School of Economics as well. My sister was actually at Oxford, so she'd be behind you on that one, but it's clearly an inferior school. Just before I get going, I do have to mention the safe harbor statement and draw your attention that I may make some forward-looking statements during the course of this presentation related to IPG. I draw your attention to the risk factors and uncertainties outlined in our Form 10-K. I won't read that entire safe harbor statement to you. So IPG is, as John mentioned, I've been there actually I joined IPG in 99. When just exiting 98, we did about $8 million in revenue, and we've just got to $1.6 billion. So we had a bit of a growth period through 2000 on the back of the telecom boom, and then ended up declining back to $22 million. And then through the growth really of the industrial laser market and the execution that we've had in that area over the last 12 to 13 years have really regenerated some quite tremendous growth. So the company went public in 2006 with just under $150 million in revenue, so we've increased sixfold since then. We have maintained a very solid and profitable business model with operating margins that are above 35%. We're really the global market leader in industrial fiber lasers. As you'll see, I'll talk a little bit about where we do our manufacturing and the vertical integration and the importance of Massachusetts, but we're also a global company and the importance of our global manufacturing base there. We are very vertically integrated in terms of all the different technologies that we use to make the lasers, and there's a lot of IP that we have within that that's both protected with patents, protected with processes, know-how, and trade secrets. The laser market itself is very interesting, you might be surprised to learn. It addresses many different applications in industrial areas. I'll talk a little bit about those, but also in emerging markets in the medical arena, both in some aesthetic and now some increasingly surgical applications as well. The company obviously has done very well on the profitability and cash flow generation side as well. 90% of our business at the moment comes from materials processing applications. And I spend a lot of time talking to investors about this, and it can get a little bit boring because we cut metal, we weld metal. Brazing is another type of joining technology. We drill holes in metal parts. We clad different materials using the lasers to deposit. For example, you could deposit a corrosion-resistant material on a low-cost steel platform, or a hard material on a softer material to more cost-effectively produce it. We're very active in additive manufacturing applications, so that's with metal processes where people are developing. Initially, that started really as a rapid prototyping technology, so you could build complex parts quickly that had been designed using CAD technologies. Now, increasingly, that's actually moving into mass manufacturing of different parts for things like aerospace engines, where they can reduce the total number of parts required to produce an engine because they can build that as a single component. On marking applications, we touch many of the things and devices you use today. So, for example, smartphones, you'll find the logos are marked with our lasers. Inside those smartphones, a lot of the microelectronics and batteries and contact points are welded with our lasers. The glass, for example, on the smartphones that's used to cover the camera is cut with our laser, as is the fingerprint readable on-off button in many of those things. So these are actually, you'd be surprised at the number of different products that you come across that are made with lasers and with IPG lasers. I always like to draw attention, so if you use a razor blade by one of the main manufacturers in Massachusetts, if you look at that razor blade, it has a series of little dots on the blade that weld it to the wire behind it. Each of those little micro dots is a small weld that's actually made with a laser. So you'd be surprised at sort of some of the different areas that you can find laser applications. I talked a little bit about our technology and the processes and know-how that we have. We're continuously innovating at IPG in much the same way that Michael alluded to at UMASS. We use a lot of patent protection around our technology, so we've got about 200 patents worldwide, another 320 patents pending. Some of those are around processes, manufacturing know-how. They're also around applications, so in the way that different people use the lasers as well. Our vertical integration is very important to us. It enables us to build scale and reduce cost, and also keeps the technologies inside the company. And then we've also built this tremendous scale on the manufacturing side where we produce thousands of lasers per year. One of the things I'd like to draw attention to on the IP side in relation to Massachusetts in particular is we actually make all of our diodes, which are a key component of the fiber laser, at a semiconductor facility in Oxford. We've invested very heavily in that. There's a significant amount of employment, as you'll see, that's driven from that activity there. We've chosen not to offshore any of that capability for a couple of reasons. First of all, offshoring stuff can lead to technology leakage and technology being stolen in different regions around the world. So we view that as being a security and a barrier of protection around the technology. The second thing we've done around that is that we've actually used those, noticed on one of your slides, Karin, there's actually a bit of an inflection point on manufacturing labor in the last 5 or 6 years, where despite the increases in automation, we're starting to see a bit of a pickup in manufacturing employment. And that kind of very much dovetails with what IPG does. So we use a combination of labor and automation to reduce the cost of manufacturing and keep it in developing countries, the US and Massachusetts being one of them. So there's very much, robots are, as you alluded to as well, there's an optimism around robots, and we kind of buy into that. Our lasers are easily integrated in robots, but it's also related to the way that we actually make product internally at the company. And it enables you to lower the cost of manufacturing and improve productivity and produce product in what is allegedly a very high cost area. So we actually have one of the lowest very much diode cost manufacturing in the world. We produce our diodes for $2 a watt. When we first started making those diodes, we used to buy the chips from another company in the US. It cost us $80 per watt. So we've taken more than 95% out of the cost of those chips. And that's all happened in Massachusetts. It hasn't happened abroad. So if you innovate and you manufacture stuff and you use the latest technologies, you can achieve those cost advantages here. There are lots of growth opportunities that the company has in new products, developing the applications, developing the way that we deliver the beam out of the laser to the different materials we work on, producing lasers with different wavelengths that get you into different markets like the medical business, microprocessing, more research and development type applications, projection and display. At our Marlborough facility, you can actually come down there and we invite investors down. Not all the general public can come down and watch a movie there. But we have a laser that runs a projection system in that facility where the quality of the picture actually coming out of a laser-based projection system is phenomenal. I was a bit skeptical before I'd seen this, that there was going to be a huge improvement in pictures. And I went down and saw the projection of a series of cinema trailers that they use, and was actually astounded. I went back home and I thought I had quite a good quality TV at home, and I was like, this is complete rubbish after I'd seen that picture. So you've got emerging applications even in entertainment that use lasers. It's not just in the cinema, but people are using the lasers for projecting advertising displays, for example, onto the side of the Hoover Dam. There was a truck company that had a huge advertising display projected onto the side of the Hoover Dam in the last couple of years. I'll get on to talking about our employment and where that exists. So we have just over 4,000 employees around the world. You can see from this slide that we have key manufacturing sites in Oxford, Massachusetts. We've got a R&D and some manufacturing also in Marlborough that I'll talk about. In the US, we have a significant sales and service and support operation in Michigan. We're heavily investing also in California. And then we've got a smaller facility, which is research and development down actually in Alabama, and there's obviously a lot of manufacturing down in Alabama as well. So within the US, we're spread pretty widely, and around the world, we've got major manufacturing in Germany. We actually also make a lot of stuff. The company has a Russian heritage behind it. We make a lot of product in Russia. That's our low-cost, if you like, manufacturing area. You don't have a lot of leakage of IP in there. There's a sort of very much a loyal technical following and a deep bench also of talent on the scientific side that we can source in Russia. And we have many Russian scientists working in the US and in Germany. So we also spend a lot of time dealing with immigration processes. And one of the things that the CEO likes to draw attention to is sort of the restrictions placed on H-1B visa applicants. And that's made it increasingly difficult to get highly skilled workers into the US to help us grow. So you then have to start making decisions about where you're going to invest if you can't get those people into the country. So there are far-reaching consequences to the path that we appear or may be going down. I don't think we'll actually end up that far down it if we're lucky. In terms of employees within Massachusetts, if you go back about 10 years, we had under 250 employees in Oxford. So we moved to that Oxford location in 2001. Initially, we were in Sturbridge, Mass. We acquired a small company there in 1999. We now have more than, or just over 1,500 employees in Massachusetts, primarily split between Oxford and our Marlborough location. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide as well, we've invested very heavily in the facilities here. So we now have approaching 600,000 square feet of space. Most of that's in Oxford. There's a substantial amount of it in Marlborough as well. And I mentioned the manufacturing side of that. It's not just the semiconductor diodes and the packaging. There's a lot of other components that are made in Oxford. There's a lot of finished products. So all of the finished product for the US market and Canada, as well as Central and South America, is made in Oxford. We also export product from here to Korea and China, and some specific products made here and exported to Europe in lower volumes. Some of the newer product we're introducing will also likely be made here and exported. So it's not just the semiconductor side that employs people. In Marlborough, we set up that facility because it was easier to attract engineering talent to work in Marlborough than in Oxford, where we have a lot of manufacturing. So a lot of software engineers in Marlborough, electrical engineers. Our medical division is located in Marlborough. And we've also set up some of our systems manufacturing there. So Marlborough is becoming, it's a significant investment area for us, and it's becoming more and more important. I'd just like to sort of draw attention to some of the support we've received from the local government. So both in Oxford and Marlborough, we've received tax increment financing. So we commit to make an investment, we commit to hire a certain number of people, and we'll get a holiday on some of our property taxes that will gradually erode over time. There are clawbacks if we don't achieve the target employment or the investment goals that we've made. We've substantially exceeded all of those goals in the last 10 years, so we're in no danger of having any clawbacks on that. There was, right in 2002, when the business had collapsed and we had the first TIF funding, we did have some renegotiations with the town of Oxford because we were behind on our hiring, but they were very accommodating around that, and the business had started to grow again, so we felt comfortable that we'd be able to achieve the targets that we'd set ourselves. On the back of some of the incremental tax financing, we've also received state investment tax credits, and the initial tax benefits we get from the towns always helps when we go to the state because they see that we're getting local government support, so there's a positive benefit to that. Other areas we've worked with the state government and local governments, so we have a sewer extension that was completed a few years ago between Oxford and Webster and Dudley. A large part of that was financed by the state. It's not just for the benefit of IPG, it benefits all of the people who live and the other businesses on Old Webster Road as well. But we actually contributed probably about just over 10 to 15% of the cost of that sewer line. The state funded a large part of it. In Marlborough, given the investments that have gone on there, we've seen upgrades that the town has supported us and made to the, I was going to say pavements, but that's what I'd say in England, the sidewalks. So there's sort of like little areas and larger areas that we've worked as well to improve the local infrastructure too. And then we also benefit significantly from the state R&D tax credit. And actually there's a production tax credit we benefit from as well, both at the federal and state level. So there's a significant amount of support that we get here. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and wait for any questions that you might have afterwards. Thank you very much. I'll stay up there.
Thank you, Tim. That was kind of exciting to see that's going on right here in our backyard, as all things. Our last speaker, but not least, is Thomas White. Dr. White is a professor of economics at Assumption College, the beautiful college on Salisbury Street, where he's taught there since 1994. He holds a Ph.D. and MA in economics from SUNY Binghamton, a BS in economics from Ohio State. He's currently teaching, his current teaching responsibilities include macroeconomics, money and banking. Dr. White has published articles in the fields of environmental economics, urban economics, as well as economic education. His current research focuses on estimating the Worcester Economic Index, which we should all find very interesting, and that's going to track the performance of our Worcester economy. So, Thomas, please join us.
Okay, thank you, John, and thanks to the Worcester Business Journal and the Chamber for inviting me today. Mike and Tim and Karin have covered a lot of ground, and I'm going to be a little bit more local, but we'll see how this works, and hopefully I'll be brief. Over the past 3 years, I have been issuing quarterly reports that I call Worcester Economic Indicators, and these reports include an update on the Worcester Economic Index that I've developed in order to track the overall Worcester economy. My plan for today is to kind of go through the Worcester Economic Index, describe it, hopefully in a sort of non-nerdy, non-technical way, fight my urges. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the report that was issued a couple of weeks ago, the forecast, and a few of the leading indicators that are included in the report. The Worcester Economic Index is developed using Bureau of Labor Statistics data on employment and unemployment, and the purpose is to try to get an idea of what's happening locally to add to the national kind of information that we typically hear about. The easiest way to describe what's into the index is with some pictures. So this is payroll employment for the local Worcester area going back to 1990. And if you look at the data, you can see that there were 3 noticeable recessions in that data: early 90s, very deep recession, 2001, 2002, a more modest recession, and then the most recent downturn that we all remember too well. So in this kind of data, it's local data, and you can see while we can identify these big dips, you can see a lot of noise, a lot of kind of bounce in that data. And if you look at the very last piece there on the chart, most recently the payroll employment number has fallen a little bit. So does that mean, okay, we're at the start of a recession, we're about to drop off a cliff, or is it just kind of part of the noise in the data? So in order to try to come up with something that's a little bit less bouncy, the Worcester Economic Index uses 3 data pieces that kind of smooth out our picture of the economy. This is household employment numbers, which is found using from the Bureau of Labor Statistics survey of households. The previous one was from survey of employers. Again, follows a similar path. The numbers aren't identical to, I changed the scale here so I can just kind of overlay these things. But you see a similar kind of path, but you also see some divergence between the 2 employment numbers. And here is the unemployment rate, which offers additional information. Again, just overlaying what it would look like on that employment scale. And we see during recessions, the unemployment rate goes up. During expansions, it comes back down. And to kind of emphasize the co-movement of these things, if we kind of invert that unemployment, so I've just flipped the unemployment rate here, you can see there's a pretty strong correlation between the 3 categories. So the Worcester Economic Index basically takes all 3 of these things and turns them into a single index. It's not an average of the indexes. It's more of a composite that looks at both the current months as well as previous and following months to sort of get a smoother picture of the economy. So in doing that, this red line represents the Worcester Economic Index, and if we just look at the index, you can see we've kind of been able to smooth out this path of the economy. So the model that is used to develop this is basically trying to find a data series that is most consistent with the observed data series on employment and unemployment. So, and if we look at this, we see clearly the recession, the 3 recessions I mentioned, and we see kind of a more consistent or smoother pattern of the economy. Why is smooth important? Well, we do know that the economy goes up and down, but it doesn't tend to turn on a dime. Okay, the economy's been performing better in recent months. We wouldn't expect it. Oh, next month we're completely falling off the cliff. So it is something that we're trying to estimate a kind of a smoother path. So that's the index in a picture. Well, what are some of the results? So the most recent report showed that the fourth quarter of 2016, the Worcester Economic Index came in at a growth rate of 2.1%, which is a little bit slower than the growth rate of the preceding quarters, 3.8% in the third quarter. Not inconsistent with what we see at the national level. I think the 3.5% was the third quarter rate at the national level, and 1.9 was the fourth quarter rate of GDP. So we see some similarities. But the purpose of the index is to find or be able to recognize periods where the local economy may diverge a little bit from the national economy. Certainly they're going to tend to move in the same direction, but the index, we may find periods in which they are moving in other directions. So I provide an update of the Worcester Economic Index each quarter with my reports. In addition, I offer a forecast of the index. Once I have an estimate of the path of the index going back to 1990, I put it into my forecast model, which was developed. I started out with 8 economic indicators, leading indicators at the national scale to try to get an idea of what is happening to the local economy. After testing hundreds of different patterns, I wound up with just 4 leading indicators to come up with the forecast. So the forecast that was in the most recent report, the growth forecast looking forward 6 months for the Worcester Economic Index, the bottom line there is 1.7%. And the way in which this thing is interpreted is that the top line there, 1.3%, that's the long run growth going over, going back to about 2000. So the long run growth is about 1.3%. These are annualized numbers, even though it's talking about a fourth quarter or a 6 month forecast, but they're measured on an annualized rate. So the long run trend is 1.3, and then the other components are basically how much these indicators may push us above or below the long run trend. So according to my model, consumer expectations, which have been on the strong side in recent, currently are not really offering any kind of positive or negative contribution to the projection for the forecast. The S&P 500 and the leading credit index, which is a kind of a composite of lots of financial market indicators put out by the Conference Board, are both providing small, modest bumps to the forecast. The only one that's negative is the interest rate spread, which is the spread between the 10-year Treasury rate and the federal funds rate. So while the federal funds rate is still at very low levels, the recent increases are starting to show a little bit of a drag on the forecast for the local economy. The last line there, the Worcester Economic Index itself, 0.4, is included in the forecast. It's sort of, as I said before, the index or the economy has momentum, so past performance of the index is contributing to what we're going to forecast is going on in the future. So this is my forecast for the Worcester Economic Index going forward 6 months, reported every quarter in the report I put out. In addition, I have a few other local indicators that I include in the report. As you move away from national data towards more local data, it is noisier, it's lots more month-to-month variation, and therefore it's, take it with a grain of salt, I guess is maybe what I'm saying. It's information, but we don't want to freak out too much because there's a lot of volatility in this stuff. So the 3 indicators that I do track are online help wanted advertising. This is a data series put out also by the Conference Board that tries to capture total number of online ads. And these are Worcester area, greater Worcester area projections that or estimates that I'm looking at. So the idea here is help wanted advertisements should precede hiring in the future. So looking at how many help wanted advertisements there are can give us some insight in terms of what might be the employment picture looking forward. So comparing fourth quarter 2015 to 2016, over that year, the number of online help wanted ads has fallen. This has fallen a pretty substantial amount, 21% in the greater Worcester area. Nationally, the help wanted index is also down, I think in the 9 to 10% range. So that is one leading indicator that's giving us a negative sign. Another one that I always report is new business incorporations. Locally, within the greater Worcester area, from the quarter 4 2015 to 2016, they're up about a little bit over 9%. The idea of following those new business incorporations is if there are lots of incorporations, these are new businesses that might be considering hiring down the road. So an increase in that is a positive signal. And the final one that I include is the Massachusetts initial unemployment claims. Unemployment claims tend to be a leading indicator of the direction of the economy. Therefore, if unemployment claims go up, that is considered a negative signal. On this one, though, they're up modestly over the previous year. But looking at the initial unemployment claims data, currently we're up a little bit, but we're still pretty much at the 25-year low for initial claims in the state of Massachusetts. So when you're at the bottom, there's no way to go up but up, and in that case, it's a negative signal, but not much of a negative signal. So looking at these leading indicators can't really tell us much more than the economy is. These indicators are giving us kind of some mixed signals. So I guess I've tried to summarize some of the items covered in my quarterly reports. I hope you found something of interest in these reports. If you want to learn more, the current report is up on this website here. If you Google Worcester Economic Indicators or Worcester Economic Index, I'm #1 coming up. So if you're interested, the full report is there, and there's some more detail there concerning how the indicator is found. So thank you very much.
Right, so we're going to ask our panelists to come up here for our question and answer period. So please, if you have some, please write them down, and we do have a few. Well, thank you. That was enlightening. And I'm not sure we moved from uncertainty to possibility, but I think there's a lot of exciting things going on in Worcester, and I'm not sure we could say there's exciting things going on in our country, but there are some things and cause for concerns. One of the things, and I think, Karin, you may have mentioned this, that I've been thinking a little bit about is this declining labor force with unemployment going in a stable trend anyhow, and then the possibility of immigration, the deportations of a massive amount of people. How do you see that playing out in the future, and is that giving you cause for concern?
So the trend of what you might say labor force participation doesn't give me as much concern, because I see it driven largely by just the age that people are at, in terms of retiring and stepping away. I think what you're also asking, though, is a decline in the growth of labor force.
Right. Growth of labor force.
And that of course is essential to what we think our potential growth rate can be. And that is going to be driven either by new births or immigration. So I find it worrisome. I think I share exactly the kinds of concerns that you put, I think, quite firmly out there and real specific, human case. But I think of it in a more abstract sense. I think it's a negative trend. In fact, if you were so not busy this week that you were listening to Janet Yellen's testimony before the Senate and the House, which is, I won't say I'm not busy, but they pay me to listen. She mentioned this issue that it would be incredibly negative for potential growth going forward. And given that our growth rates in terms of our potential are already declining, it's absolutely the wrong direction, whether you want to look at it from a human scale, which I prefer to look at it in terms of human terms, but you can also just look at it, as a cold-hearted economist and say it doesn't help our growth.
No, not at all. We have a question here from the audience that I think is kind of interesting, and see who wants to handle this one. What is your outlook on the strong dollar?
I mean, that's actually quite a good one for me probably to look at. I think there's one of the things that Karin, you'd referenced was this sort of declining volatility around some of the major indexes in terms of the stock markets and other areas. One of the things we've seen is a lot of volatility. Where the volatility has ended up, I think, is in exchange rates over the last year, right? So you've got diverging monetary policy between Europe and the US in particular, and also to a degree in China. So you're seeing the dollar appreciate significantly against the euro, and also against the Chinese renminbi. They're continuing to pursue a loosening policy in Europe, although you're starting to see, again, as Karin alluded to, increase in inflation in Germany. So in fact, the euro's kind of stabilized and even come back a little bit, with the expectation that rates in Germany may start going up a bit more quickly than was forecast. You then got sort of the unintended issues in Europe, the Italian debt crisis, the French referendum, which may be the spanners in the work in Europe over the next year or so. But so for us, currency volatility reduces the value of the total sales we report in the US as the dollar appreciates. So we actually gave an assessment of that on our earnings call, where we said we expected growth this year between 10 and 14%. So we gave some long-term guidance for the year, but we said that was impacted by about 3 percentage points as the dollar was strengthening. So the value of our Chinese sales we expect to accelerate, but the value in dollars will go down a bit. We get some benefits, so we make stuff here, so the strengthening of that dollar increases some of our costs in terms of foreign products sold, but we also have this benefit of making stuff in Germany and in Russia as well. And we get a benefit from the weaker euro, and the rubles actually started to strengthen again as well on the back of some of the oil price increases. But we get some cost benefit, but you get a revenue headwind in relation to that. And you kind of have to deal with that volatility as best you can. Hedging strategies tend to have the effect of smoothing rather than eliminating gains and losses, right? So I've tended not to hedge stuff, and we've just suffered the volatility on a quarterly basis because of the cost of hedging, and that cost can vary between different locations.
Can I add to that? I think you made a great point about the volatility is actually being sort of funneled into the FX space, the foreign exchange space. And for our part, we think that that's likely to continue. We think the dollar will actually strengthen this year a little bit more. Perhaps we're being optimistic, but we're hoping and not expecting it to strengthen too much, but we do think it will strengthen further, just on the back of the Fed continuing to hike, growth here outpacing growth in other relative countries.
Anything to add that, Tom, or as an economist? Or pass?
I think I'll pass on that one. I'm the local guy.
Michael, here's a question for you that I find interesting. If the talent pool of international scientists is reduced due to federal policy, what could undergraduate and graduate institutions need to do to increase the talent? Right here in Worcester alone, we have quite a few schools, and what could they do to help with that?
All right, a couple things. First, I have to apologize to the economists. My staff told me that I offended you, and I'm very sorry for that. If I did, I didn't mean to, and important. Second, I'd like to point out, you finally found Oxford, by the way, so all the grief he gave you, you're in Oxford now. So it must have been at London School of Economics Education. You finally found Oxford. That's beautiful. I think the answer to that question lies in the partnerships that our institutions have with our local school systems. For whatever reason, science, technology, engineering, and math is not cool in the grammar schools and the middle schools and the high schools. It's just not cool. And the Breakthrough Prize, by the way, which has been established by the founders of Google and Facebook on the West Coast, it's the equivalent of 3 Nobel Prizes monetarily. If you get the Nobel Prize, you get $1 million. You get the Breakthrough Prize, you get $3 million. And one of our scientists won it a couple years ago, Victor Ambrose. And the idea there, Bryn's idea and others, is to bring scientists to the level of rock stars, so that children will see it's cool to be a scientist. We need a lot of work in our schools. Our teachers, many of our teachers are not teachers who have degrees in the subject area. And math and science is something it's very incremental in the learning. So that if you don't get it in the 1st grade or the 4th grade or the 5th grade, you're definitely not going to get it in the 8th grade, the 9th grade, and the 12th grade. And I think we're doing a good job in Worcester. I think that our schools are terrific partners with the school system. I happen to be at a meeting on, Tuesday morning with the superintendent of the Worcester Public Schools, who's terrific, by the way. We have too many kids coming to school with no food. One of the schools has put in a washing machine and a dryer because kids were not coming to school because their clothes were dirty. And so now you bring a bag of clothes and you wash the clothes, and the kids go home and clean clothes so they can come to school the next day. I mean, this is a serious problem. And this is right here in Worcester, by the way. And I think the only way that if a kid comes to school hungry, they're never going to be able to learn. If we don't support the local school systems, we're never going to teach them the subjects. And if you look at the investment that foreign countries are making in the education of their youth, it's extraordinary. And all of us, everybody here, Tim's terrific leadership at the chamber, but all of us need to be active at the schools and be participants. We are very proud. We have adopted the North High School. So our scientists are in there, and our students are reading, and we're teaching science. We helped for a long time with the AP programs. We're very proud of summer programs but we can do more. And after what I saw the other day, we're on the way over there to build a food pantry, because the children you just cannot study if you're hungry. You can't do anything if you're hungry. And we have children going home in the Worcester Public Schools at night, worried about whether they're going to have a dinner meal. And that's on all of us.
Tim, here's a question for you, and I'm kind of wondering if IPG obviously must be into we hear a lot about advanced manufacturing these days, and and again, I think that one of the problems I have encountered with advanced manufacturing is sometimes finding the labor force that has the basic mathematical skills is not been as easy as people would think. But the skilled labor pool in Massachusetts for technical and advanced manufacturing, have you found that's here, or is there, again, more education needs for that kind of labor force?
By and large, I think the first thing is that I think the labour force is getting a bit tighter at the moment. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find well-skilled people. So, we work again with the local educational institutions. In Oxford, we actually have a good pool of assembly employees that we can source out of some of the community colleges, so the vocational colleges. So you don't have to be an engineer if you're building product for us. So we've been historically able to source that, for example, on our packaging and finished product manufacturing areas. I'd say this you'll hear not just me, but other people talk about, it doesn't necessarily have to just be a university education you have to, but skills in terms of machine shop capability, right? Running machines which are increasingly sophisticated tools, there has to be some training in that regard, and there's a shortage of machine tool operators, not just in Massachusetts, I think countrywide. One of the reasons we also, then to sort of digress onto the really skilled side of things, one of the reasons we did start to invest in Marlborough was to expand the potential geographic reach that we had to source more highly skilled employees. You know, if you come out of college and you've got an engineering degree, not to put Oxford down, but people want to live closer to Boston and some of the more metropolitan areas, right? So in Marlborough, you certainly have a wider net that you can cast over that, and that's really helped us in that degree. I come back to the comment the CEO often makes is this H-1B visa program, where there's a lot of limitations on bringing people into the country in that regard. So yeah, there is a shortage of skills. Valentin will talk about this and say, like, China's going to be miles ahead in terms of scientifically educated graduates, and many of them coming here and going back to China. Some of them stay here if they're allowed to. So yeah, I think there is a skill gap to many degrees, but it hasn't impacted us that much. I come back to this as well. We've got this great benefit of having manufacturing not just in Massachusetts, right? We leverage a lot of experience here, but we can also source people in Germany. And we also use Russia as a source of deep scientific talent there, right? Science is actually really appreciated in Russia still. There's a very strong scientific ethic in terms of education, and similar to India. So, but we can bring our scientists. There's a lot of people who work for IPG in Russia, do their PhDs whilst working at the company, and then they'll move over to Germany. And historically, we've moved a lot of people to Oxford as well. So we source people from different places around the world in that regard.
Here's a question I think is kind of interesting, and I don't know if anyone knows this, but someone asked, and let me get it here, a sense of industries pursuing the Worcester area. I'm wondering if that's something you've run across, Tom, or do we know of anything that's potential growth areas here in Worcester?
Well, I think the gentleman in the middle here, the key here is one of the things that is really important for any local economy is sort of these sort of networks or clusters of activity, and the biotech sector in Worcester is one of those things that many cities want to replicate, or what's the next big thing, what's the next Silicon Valley, it's very difficult to sort of pursue that as a policy. It's kind of an organic thing that results. So, but I think clearly the sort of the biotech medical sector has been the one that's been growing. I had some numbers that over the past year, employment in Worcester is up about 4,600. The healthcare sector is up almost half of that, about 2,200 in the healthcare sector. So, that's the one that has been for a good long time and continues to be sort of the growing sector.
We're talking to companies all the time, and I think there's some interesting things to think about. So, in Kendall Square right now in Cambridge, there's very little opportunity for growth there. And the rents are roughly 3x Worcester. So you pay 3 times to be in that location than you do here. And in a couple of instances when folks have come to talk to us about establishing a company, and I'm not allowed to see them until the end because I might screw it up, but then I meet them, when I meet with them, and what you're laughing, but I tell them they should come to Worcester. And they don't want to come to Worcester. And they say they don't want to come to Worcester because the talent's in Boston, people want to ride their bike to work and all that kind of stuff. And then they're telling me about how hard it is to finance their company. And that, the valley of death and how much they have to invest and things like that. And I actually think, so you think about Raleigh-Durham and you think about Rochester, Minnesota. I'll give you those two as examples. You look at the research triangle around Raleigh-Durham. It's as hot as anything in Kendall Square. And I believe we can do that right here. And in our own biotech park, not that I'm here to give an ad for it, but in our own biotech park, we have new companies coming to be established there. We've just got the opportunity to do biomanufacturing. It's that way, actually, up the top of the hill here. And I think that those are very important opportunities. I'll tell you another thing that we just have to do. We need more airplanes. And I've been talking to Tim and we're talking to the folks at the airport. We need more airplanes. People want to go to a place. So just think about it for a minute. Mayo Clinic, awesome reputation, right? It's in Rochester, Minnesota. Anybody know where Rochester, Minnesota is? It's the middle of freaking nowhere. All right, come on. And how does Rochester, Minnesota work? It works because it has an airport. It's a vibrant airport. We have 2 planes a day. And we need 22 planes a day. And when we have 22 planes a day, now here's one of our dilemmas. We have patients, there is no week that goes by that I don't get a call from somewhere in the world saying somebody's got something, they want to come to our place to be looked after. And then I say, well, you got to fly to Boston. And they drive past 17 of the world's finest hospitals to come out here. It's just not practical. Now, I can bring a private jet in here, no problem. I can tell the guy who's got he can fly his private jet here, no problem. But the basic, person is going to come commercial, and we need to have some more airplanes, and I think that will be helpful. So to answer your question, I think we can recruit companies, and we're talking to companies all the time. I think if we can do better in transportation, we have scientists that come from abroad who cannot take the train from Boston to Worcester in order to get to work at a reasonable hour. They got to take the train at 5:40 or something like that, and that gets them in here at 7:10. And they have to leave, I think the rush train coming out, So, and we've talked to, and Tim's been all over this, but we've talked to the folks at the Transportation Department. Just think about it. We have scientists that want to get on a train in Newton or right around there, and they want to be able to come nonstop right here to go to work, where 22,000 people go to work every day. It's really not possible if you want to come on the train. And when you talk to the folks in Boston, we're talking all the time about how many trains we need to go to Boston. Well, we've got to have more trains come out here. So I think transportation is important. Continuing to develop our area as a place for science, biomanufacturing will help if we can do that. The med school is clearly working, so I think that's helping. Schools, very big attractor to folks that, we recruit scientists, we have no problem because they can, if they want, they can be right in here, or they can go to one of the suburbs, really good school systems, Southborough, Shrewsbury, Westboro. So I think that those are the basic element of the fabric of society is what we need to continue to build here. And we need to be bullish. We need to be bullish. Our companies are all here. And we need to be out there saying to other companies and to those who would be interested, Worcester is a really terrific place. Tim, you told me there's 55 new restaurants in Worcester. I mean, that's terrific. That really is terrific. It's just a wonderful place to be at the moment. You look at downtown at night now. It's really getting better. It's right. We can go to the theater. We can do all those kinds of things you can do in other parts of the Commonwealth.
Just planes.
It's something
oh, sure.
Michael's saying. So if you actually look at why IPG ended up in this region, if you compare the cost of what real estate is as you get closer into Boston, one of the main reasons we came down here was we bought land down in Oxford for $10,000 an acre at that time. And we bought 74 acres, right? So we've gradually expanded into that entire campus. Oxford it's close enough to Boston. It's a 50-minute drive, so long as there isn't any problem on the Pike. You can get down to Providence in 50 minutes as well. And actually, Hartford's not too bad from that central location either. We don't find many people flying into Worcester, probably because of the lack of aircraft. I won't make any jokes about sometimes there's a third plane that takes off from Worcester. It's the CEO in the IPG plane occasionally going.
Yeah, I use the university jet all the time too.
But so you do have access. So we'll have people will use Providence Airport. They'll use Boston. They'll use Hartford as well. So it's actually a good location in terms of that general access as well. I think your comments around the trains are actually spot on as well. Even coming out this way, I know is bad on the train. Even getting up from Providence to Boston on the train takes you way too long to commute that way and stuff like that. So the transportation infrastructure, I think, is a very important thing to continue to think about.
Yeah, there is something I've seen maybe it should be one of our leading indicators. Teaching at Clark now since 1999, it used to be, if you talk to seniors, they couldn't wait to get out of Worcester. In the last 3 or 4 years, I'm starting to hear, I'm staying here if I can find a job. Worcester's a really good place to be. I could afford to live here. There's plenty to do, and I think that's a really, and I'm sure you're seeing an assumption too that in Clark, we're bringing kids from all over the world and all over the country, and many of them are choosing to stay here if they can find a job. There's some advantages, and a student just told me yesterday that she'll be getting married and said my husband-to-be and I are both Clark students, and we can probably afford a house here in a few years, which we can't in Boston. I thought that was some good news for us. Karin, I have a question here for you. Someone really liked your analogy of the bicycle. So U.S. and China are the two wheels on the bike, and they're interconnected. How does that uncertainty in relations affect that, the bicycle?
The uncertainty
In the relations between the two nations?
So I think the traditional links between China and the U.S. are not, for example, directly through like a financial sector the way we would see them between, say, the UK and the US or Europe and the US or Japan and the US. We don't have that interconnectedness. It's not that a lot of, for example, Americans own Chinese debt or own Chinese shares. They don't, you know. So that's not the direct tie. The direct tie is frankly through trade. It's indirectly through emerging markets. And if China has been one of the predominant investors, importers and exporters around, you know, a key importer, exporter, and investor for emerging markets, and it steps away from that role. Emerging markets kind of sag, and then we feel the secondary effect of that. So that's one issue. But I think maybe the question that you're posing is more around what does this uncertainty do? And I think I alluded to it a little bit in the first slide I showed. I mentioned geopolitical risks, and one of the key risks with the different focus of the new administration is that where perhaps Obama was very clear about wanting to establish the TPP and establish the U.S. as a core partner for Asia ex-China, by getting away from that, the TPP or some form of it may continue with China renaming it and now owning that Asia-Pacific axis. So that is a choice that's been made, it seems, and yet it doesn't have to be, I don't have to tell you a terrible tale. It's eminently possible that what China's trying to do, of course, is to be the biggest dog on its block. And even if Trump steps away from being president in Asia, it doesn't have to mean the end of a mutual set of global growth. But there are inherently more risks now, and when you talk to folks who think about geopolitical risks all the time, what they will tell you is tensions in the Pacific are one of the #1 risks that they see. It's not a base case, but it's a risk, maybe more so than the Middle East now.
Yeah, we had something circulate around Clark because we have so many Chinese students that we are one tweet away from disaster.
Well, the Chinese, yeah, I have only been to China once, and it was a very long time ago. And when I went, we actually had to have a minder with us, so it was that long ago. But the Chinese have a very important meeting coming up. I didn't get a chance to mention it, but it's their party congress. It happens in October. They do it every 5 years. And we talk about all the elections in Europe. You mentioned them. That is the other key, I won't call it an election, but a sort of political event, is the one in China in October of this year. And that's the opportunity for Xi Jinping to consolidate his power, which I would argue is already consolidated, but he's moved folks in and out of his inner circle, and this is the chance for him to anoint it and then move forward with his next 5-year plan. And so that's a very big deal, and that informs our view that probably China is going to avoid any sort of ruckus going into that meeting. I think many things could happen after that meeting once Xi Jinping consolidates, but going into it, we expect a kind of hopefully smooth sailing for China.
Michael, we have a question, and if you promise not to make us cry. How do you drive research, innovation, and also help control costs of drugs and medications?
All right, so 2 separate questions here, I really think. How do you drive research? You drive research by having incredibly talented minds in a nurturing environment. I'm going to tell you something. There is no day that I say to a researcher, hey, write a grant. I mean, these are self-motivated individuals. When the stimulus program was put in place and $10 billion was made available to that, our scientists applied for grants and got them in incredible numbers. They just went to work and they started to write. In fact, most of our scientists will tell you they spend way too much time on the grant writing process. I think what we need to fear is that the median age for the first NIH R01, which is the sort of a principal investigator grant that a scientist gets, the median age for that is now 41 years old. So you take a scientist who has gone to college, gotten his Ph.D., or gone to medical school, gotten a Ph.D., MD, Ph.D. I have a student mentoring right now at the Brigham. So he went to our medical school, got an MD, Ph.D., so he graduated at 28. Then he goes to the Brigham and does medicine for 3 years, 31. Then he does a pulmonary critical care fellowship for 3 years, 34. Then he goes into a lab and starts a part-time practice and goes into a lab. It'll be 7 more years before he gets his first R01. And scientists are looking at that and saying, students are looking at that. They don't get dumb, by the way, when they get into school. They say, okay, is this really something we want to do? Do we want to make this kind of an investment, wait till 41 years old before I get my first grant? So we are, as a nation, we are risking this incredible scientific infrastructure. I spend a fair bit of time in China. I probably go every other year for a little bit. And I'm telling you, they get it over there. They get the science. These scientists are working. They work day and night. And we recruit many of their best, and we send them back into their country. It's going to be a great boon to them. Now, drug price is a different question. To be careful here because I have very great concern about the cost of drug prices. So a couple points. First, it's ludicrous that the Medicare program, the largest purchaser of drugs in the world, cannot negotiate with pharmaceutical companies over their price. It's nuts. Everybody else can negotiate, but not Medicare, because the pharma lobby has been so strong in Washington that can't happen. So that's crazy. My opinion, it's crazy. A lot of people don't think it's crazy. I think it's crazy. We now have biologics that are costing $150,000 to $300,000. How can that be? It can be for a simple reason that the people who are getting it have an insurance program. Because nobody, I don't care who you are in this room, if you don't have an insurance program, you can't afford a $300,000 drug. You just can't. Take everything you got. And so we're going to have to think about that. Now, I was on a panel last week with the head of Genzyme, and he said, if you take away the ability for us to set the price of the drug, that'll end innovation. Well, maybe it'll end innovation, maybe it'll stimulate innovation. I'm not exactly sure. But the notion that we're going to charge $150,000 to $300,000, and the only reason that we do it is because we can. And in the developing world, the same drugs are being used, and they're being used at $8 or $10. It's whatever they give it to them, because the companies, they have the largesse, and they give it to them. So we're gonna have to. That is a major issue that we're going to have to deal with. I think the other thing you need to be concerned about. Some companies are actually getting away from it. Some pharmaceutical companies are getting away from research. They're coming out of it because the ability for us to find a blockbuster is really pretty limited. We're going to go to much more individualized medicine programs. So I'll tell you, we have a thing called the avatar mice. You're going to like this. You won't cry. It's whoever had the robots up there. I guess you had robots. Okay, so here's what we do now. We have these mice that have no immune system. So the immune system has been taken away. And when an operation occurs for a patient, let's say with appendiceal cancer, if your appendix stays in, you can get a cancer in the appendix out in time. We have a donor who gave us some money, and we do between 17 and 20 appendiceal cancers a year. This is a very rare thing. But we take the cancer from the operating room to the pathology laboratory, to the mice laboratory, and we inject that patient's tumor into that mouse. And 3 weeks later, the mouse is growing appendiceal cancer. That is that patient's cancer. And now we can treat the mouse. And we can say, we can give the mouse certain chemotherapy and see whether the cancer goes away. We're doing it in melanoma. We're doing it in colon cancer. There's any number of diseases now where we take the tumor comes out of the operating room into the humanized mouse. We treat the mouse. And the goal will be with time that we can actually know exactly what will kill that cancer. If you go to our zebrafish facility, so you all heard the seafood ad, you know, and the guy from Legal Seafood does the ad about, well, you want to see a zebrafish facility, you give me a card and I'll have you come over and you see it, okay? We got a zebrafish facility, take anything on they got in Boston. Zebrafish is it's like, in my words, a minnow. That's, oh God, the scientists will kill me. But think, my job is to communicate. Okay, so it's like a minnow, but you can see through the minnow. We can give the zebrafish a melanoma. And in 10 days to 2 weeks, the zebrafish grows the patient's melanoma. So now the zebrafish has a melanoma. And because it's a primitive organism, we can study that melanoma and we can find out exactly what will kill that melanoma. So I think we're going to move towards a more personalized, it's called personalized medicine, where the treatment will be geared towards the individual. Biologics are moving in that direction. And this will be a disruption in the industry over time, and I think all of us should be very optimistic that, you know, I took care of a patient when I was in med school who had, this 22-year-old kid who had a mass in his heart, and when we did the echo, you could actually see it going like this. And the young man had a testicular cancer. And he knew we had it and just kind of ignored it for a long time. And eventually, he came in cardiac arrest because he had this thing growing in his heart. And he died. That patient would not die today. And I don't really think I'm that old. I graduated from med school in '81. And right now, if you have testicular cancer, you're like 99 point, big number after it, cure rate. That's an incredible change in my lifetime. AIDS was not even discussed in my medical school curriculum. It did not exist. I read the first paper on HIV on the car to Washington on a family vacation between graduation from medical school and residency. Imagine that. And now it's a chronic disease. And right across the street, the discovery of a drug that prevents nevirapine, that prevents transmission of HIV from a mother to a child was done. And in the developing world today, millions of children live because you can take nevirapine if you're a mother with HIV, you can take nevirapine, and that will prevent the transmission of HIV from the mother to the child, and the child is born without HIV. Just think about this. That was late 90s, right across the street. So I think all of us can be encouraged. But to come back to one of the things that Karin said earlier, given the uncertainty that exists in the economy at the moment, if in fact, as a nation, we decide we are not going to invest in science and research and healthcare into the future, I think the future is very, very scary. If we make the decision that this is important to our value construct as a nation, the opportunities are endless.
Can I make a comment on the back of that, just really quickly? So thinking about the healthcare, and there's obviously a big agenda right now in Washington around what are we going to do with the Affordable Care Act, proposals to repeal it, what do you replace it with? And I would just say it's incredibly important that they get it right. Whether we like it or not, a lot of people budget their consumer spending around the expectation that they can afford drugs, that they can afford care. And if it is taken away, it will have, and again, I'll just say with my cold economist heart, I'll say it dispassionately, I'll let you be the emotional one, appealing to our heartstrings, it will stop consumer spending in its tracks. And that is also not good for growth.
Well, that wasn't too sad. It's bad for the zebrafish and mice. Here's kind of a macro question. Potential impact of, in the U.S. of repatriating overseas profits, and what's the probability of that happening? That might be more your world.
I would be curious to hear what
Oh.
you all think about it. I'll give you what I know about it, what we think. So we think it's very likely to happen. It's happened in the past. I think the last time was 2004 when there was a repatriation. This time around, there's an expectation that something a little over $1 trillion would come back, actually. Taxed somewhere between 8.75% if it's sitting in cash, and I think taxed maybe at 3% if it's sitting in other instruments. But either way, you get this money back, and then what happens? And the government gets its share of it, and then there's a disagreement about whether it's going to be used to fund infrastructure or tax cuts. That's the Washington Republican debate right now. But the rest of the money that the companies get to bring back can be used for any number of things. We do think that it's possible it could spur some more M&A. There are many industries that need some consolidation. You may see more M&A happening from that. And definitely think it's still as plausible to see dividend payments and buybacks. So it's probably quite stimulative for, the stock market.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll be very forthright about this. I think this is like one of the worst aspects of the U.S. tax system. I think it's...
Not the repatriation,
no,
but
the current
standing,
situation
non-territorial,
is just like the worldwide taxation on corporate profit and then the adjustment to a 35% rate here. It's not competitive. It's restricting capital flows. It's restricting the ability of companies to bring cash back in here and invest here, as well as distribute that capital and earnings appropriately. I think it desperately needs overhauling. I've read about the 10% repatriation tax and the 3% on reinvested profits. So even if you've reinvested in equipment and capital offshore, you're potentially going to have those earnings taxed at 3%. I think that needs looking at. There are some instances where, for example, we pay tax in Germany at 30%, right? So if you've got a 10% repatriation on that, you actually end up at a higher tax on those corporate earnings coming back in here than the 35% federal rate. So I think it desperately needs addressing, and it needs addressing with a bit more thought than that 10% or 3%. I also think, and this isn't just me coming from the corporate side, I do think the corporate tax rate in the US has to come down because it has to become more competitive with the rest of the world, right? We are just under Japan at the highest level. Most of Europe is heading towards 20% on the corporate side. They've got higher personal tax rates, but in order to encourage economic activity, corporate tax rates are being used to drive that, right? The UK is at 20% going to 17%. You've got Ireland at 12.5%. You've got rates that have come down in Germany to 30%. France is a different question altogether. We can talk about that. So I think this reform is desperately needed around it, and I think it's a real drag on. Honestly, if it's not addressed, I think you're going to find companies like IPG that chose to become headquartered here, right? IPG was actually founded offshore in Russia and then Germany, and we raised capital here and restructured the business to make the US our headquarters. At that time, German taxes were higher. You won't find companies doing that. So there's 2 points about that. IPG is actually a company that was founded by an immigrant who came here and has created 1,500 jobs in Massachusetts and more than that in the US. But companies will seriously think about where they're going to locate their headquarters. Okay, the inversions have been stopped, but for emerging tech companies and other companies, they would seriously not put in their headquarters in the US unless that law is changed.
Yeah, it seems like there's broad bipartisan support. So.
Right. Well, we just have one quick questions to end. Tim, this is for you. What is your prediction of your USGA golf handicap as of September 23rd, 2017?
Tom McGregor, thank you for that question. It's probably going up because I don't get to play that much. It certainly went up last year. Unless Tom invites me out to play like 10 rounds of golf this year.
And that'll stimulate the economy, golf balls. And like,
John should take note that invitation is pending, so he'll have to also.
Well, thank you to our panelists again, and a round of applause for them once again for lightning.
Fantastic job. Thank you so much. We have a commemorative Heart of the Commonwealth book for all of our panelists. And I just want to give a couple shout outs while we're all here to just recognize this. In having breakfast, I chatted with a couple of young faces, and at first I thought they were students, maybe from Clark, but they were students from high school. And there's a table over here, and I asked them, I said, where are you guys from? He said, Maynard High School. I said, well, this is a 7:30 breakfast event. You're in high school. What's going on? And he said, well, we're interested in business. We saw the program, and here we are. And so I think, what's that generation before the millennials? Centennials? Okay, so we have a table here of 7 high school kids that got up early and came to this economics event. Don't worry about the future, guys. Here they are. Stand up for a second. Well done. And just 2 other things from my notes. I went on to my cell phone Waze, and I figured that Tim, in traveling to Boston from Oxford, was going 88 miles an hour in 45 minutes. But that's good. You can make it. And then so anyways, that's it. I had one more small thing, but that's all right. So thank you again, Tim and the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Bank of America and Clark University School of Professional Studies, for your support as presenting sponsors, the Regional Airport, Bolus Lynch, Spectrum Business, Charter TV3, and all the other folks who made this event possible, the Beechwood Hotel, Curry Printing, Elevation Exhibits, Mark Serra Productions, Revelation Productions, and Ron Belay Photography. That is it for this morning. Thank you all for coming. Terrific panel. Thanks again.